Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and today is a special episode where I'm going to review the first season of the new Amazon series, Rings of Power. Now, lots of people have been asking me my thoughts on this show over the last number of weeks, and I thought that I would wait until the dust had kind of settled a little bit and some of the extreme emotional reactions from lots of people on the internet had died down before wading in and becoming the 15 billionth YouTuber to offer my thoughts on this show. And I want to first say that I'm not trying to come at this from the perspective of a Tolkien fan, although I am a massive Tolkien fan. I don't want to analyze this TV show based on some idea of how it measures up to the storylines laid out in the books. I just want to talk about, is this a good show in its own right? And unfortunately, I think the answer is not really, which I'm really sad about. And I know some of you have loved this show, and I'm genuinely super happy that you have, and I wish I could also love it along with you. But there are just a lot of things that get in the way of that enjoyment for me. Now, for those of you who might not know, The Rings of Power follows the storylines of the Second Age of Middle-earth, which is set thousands of years before the events of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and the main character that we follow here is Galadriel, as she tries to hunt down the rest of Sauron's followers, and even Sauron himself, who is the big bad villain of Middle-earth at this point in its history. And he seems to have disappeared, but Galadriel thinks that he's still hanging around, and spoiler alert, she's right. So to get into this, I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the hopeful, the stuff I'm still hoping that they can do well in the seasons to come. To start with the good, there's actually a lot of good stuff about this show. Some of the characters were really well done. I love the actor they chose for Celebrimbor and just love what he brings to this TV show. Prince Durin and Elrond have a great kind of bromance, frenemy thing going on, which was fantastic. Lots of fans loved this storyline, and I do too. Arondir is like the elfiest elf of all time, and he totally brings it. And showrunners, please, more Arondir in season 2. He is awesome. The forces of evil are really well done overall. The orcs have a whole lot more depth to them and a whole lot more realism than the really terrible CGI orcs of the Hobbit film trilogy. So I loved seeing real actors and real prosthetics again. That was fantastic. And Adar is a really great villain for this series as well. I know he's not like the ultimate big villain for the series, but he was just great. He's complex, he's got some interesting motivations. I love how he treats the orcs like real people and that he knows them by name and is kind of like this father figure to them. Love the actor as well, so really well done with him. But the best thing about this show for me was actually the Harfoot storyline. I know lots of fans didn't really like the Harfoots. For me, this was actually the best storyline out of them all because it had the most emotional weight and heart behind it. The actors who portrayed Nori and Poppy and Sadok and these other characters were just fantastic, and the best scene by far in this whole season goes to this moment where they are remembering their previous fellow Harfoot travelers who died during migration. And as you can see here, it's just beautifully shot, beautifully acted, and is a wonderful moment.
Biles Brightapple, stuck in the snows of the mountain pass.
We wait for you.
Lovo Baljabook, bees.
This was one of those few moments in the series where I really felt like they tapped into some of the emotional core of Tolkien's work, even though this scene doesn't have anything to do with Tolkien because it's totally made up, but it was still the best scene in the whole series for me. One last thing I really enjoyed was the mystery around the identities of the Stranger and Halbrand. If you've seen the show, then you know that those are two pretty major characters, and trying to figure out who they were and where they come from was a really interesting thing, and that for me was a win from the showrunners on that one. And I mean, I guess I should mention, obviously, they spent $1 billion on this show, so it looks absolutely gorgeous. Every single kingdom and realm and culture looks fantastic. And the music by Bear McCreary is actually really excellent as well. I really liked Galadriel's theme in particular. It's haunting, it's beautiful, and it really brought out for me some of the best moments from Howard Shore's original score for the original trilogy. So what's not great about this show? Why was it such a disappointment for me? Well, one small issue first before I get to the big one. The violence in this show and the darkness just felt too intense at times. Tolkien has some heavy stuff in his work, but the movies and the TV adaptations, in my mind, should be something that you can watch with the whole family once your kids are of a reasonable age. And for me, this really missed the mark. It's not that there was tons of violence all the time, because there wasn't, but when there is, they just turn it up to 11 in like a really disturbing way. And there's this sense of darkness and evil that pervades certain episodes and certain scenes in a way that felt much more intense than anything we saw in the original trilogy or even than we see in the books. And so for me, that was a disappointment, because I'd like to watch this show with my kids one day, and I don't really know if I want to now, actually, just because of some of the really dark, intense, and gory stuff that took place in different episodes, especially episode 6, but other episodes as well. However, the biggest problem with this show by far is the writing. The writing in this show was really not up to standard. This is on two different levels. So there's this thing called the screenplay, which is the foundation of the whole show, which means the script that unfolds the whole story and that structures everything and paces the whole show. And then there's the dialogue between the characters themselves. And of course, all those things are interrelated. In terms of screenplay, the number one problem here is that this story moved way too slowly. It was excruciatingly slow at times. And I say this as somebody who really likes slow-moving stories. I mean, Arrival is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I literally read textbooks for fun. So I don't mind slow-moving stories. But this one was so slow, and one of the reasons for that is because the dialogue between characters doesn't drive the story forwards, it grinds it to a halt. Now that doesn't mean that dialogue is bad. Of course, I mean, every TV show needs dialogue, and some shows do it really, really well. For example, my favorite show of all time is The West Wing, and that show is like 99% talking, but it's so good because every conversation drives the story forward and or reveals something interesting about the characters. In Rings of Power, this just doesn't happen. Whenever the characters talk, and they talk a lot, like a lot, they just stop whatever they're doing and talk. It doesn't matter if they're in a frozen wasteland, they stop and talk about everything. And what they say is way too obvious, and they tell us way too much. They don't leave room for the audience to lean in and make some inferences and put things together for ourselves. They just spell everything out. There was a French philosopher named Voltaire who said, "The secret to being boring is to say everything." And let me tell you, these showrunners have fully tapped into that secret. They have mastered that because these characters tell us everything about their backstory and their history and their motivations and their emotions, and all these things that we should be able to piece together on our own are just spelled out for us clearly in really awkward and obvious conversations like this one.
It's been years since the last orc was sighted. Is it not possible the other commanders are right, and our enemy is no more? Night is closing in. How long can living flesh endure where even sunlight fears to tread?
And then there are lots of other moments that are just overwritten, where characters say things in 100 words or 50 words that could have been said in 5 or 10 words. One other small note here, the scenes between Halbrand and Celebrimbor in episode 8 are fantastic, but it was actually almost even worse watching those scenes and thinking that they should have taken like the 15 minutes of screen time that those two characters get together, if it's even that. It's probably like 8 minutes or less. And they could have taken that and stretched that over 4 or 5 episodes and had this whole cat and mouse thing going on between them, with Galadriel watching on the sidelines as she's figuring out that Halbrand may not be all that he claims to be, but Celebrimbor is being deceived the whole time. That would have been super interesting in my opinion, and would have provided a much more interesting and dramatic core to the show. And instead we get so many stories spread over so much time and space with so much talking. And instead of that, they could have focused and honed in on some of those really dramatic moments. And I wish they would have just narrowed their focus in that way. That being said, what am I hopeful about? The thing is, the storylines in the book are so phenomenal and so cool that the future seasons to come, Like, I kind of feel like they almost have to try to mess it up. And I shouldn't say that, I know, because I'm tempting fate. But if you look at the storylines to come, like the War of the Elves and Sauron, the downfall of Numenor, the forging of the rest of the rings, and then the last alliance, for goodness sake, and the siege of Barad-dûr on the plains of Gorgoroth. I mean, there is so much epicness just intrinsic to these books and these stories that, again, I kind of feel like you would really have to try to mess this up. I should also say that, as a friend of mine pointed out, that aside from some of these, in my mind, overly gory and intense moments, this is just good, wholesome TV. And you don't see enough of that nowadays. Like, not every series needs to be Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, right? We should have good, wholesome stuff that the whole family can watch together. And I hope that they can really keep that going. And so I'm still optimistic that Season 2 can deliver on some of this stuff, because like Arwen says,
there is still hope.
Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. Please let me know what you thought of Season 1 of Rings of Power. If you loved this show, I'm super happy for you, I really am, and I mean that in a non-condescending, non-patronizing way. I genuinely wish I could have enjoyed this more. So please tell me, what did I miss here? What are the things that I should have seen that I didn't? And what are some of the good qualities of the show, perhaps, that I could have pointed out more of? Anyhow, take care, and we will see you next time.